Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for checking in with us again for these talks. Today, we're really focused on water quality and fisheries, and it's great that we have this platform to share with you and to have this dialogue with you all. I just wanted to start on the high level, looking at our region, right? Top of the Feather River watershed, we have these large reservoirs managed by PG&E. And as you all know, the water from here feeds the state. Millions and millions of people, hundreds of thousands of farmland acres. And at this time, we're experiencing, record heat seasons year after year. It seems like almost every year is the hottest year on record. And that really has a lot of potential to really impact what we know and love up here. And we're seeing that. I grew up in Westwood, and when I was a kid, we didn't have we had a lot more snow, and we had a lot more runoff every spring, and our reservoirs were fuller in the summer. And we're going to be talking a lot about water quality monitoring and that stuff over time. But I have seen in the last few years, we're having more and more of these harmful algal blooms, and that's happening. Mountain Meadows Reservoir, it's pretty common there. There have been algal issues in Lake Almanor, and if you look throughout the state, it's a big deal. So if temperatures continue to be higher in general, there's going to be higher and higher probabilities that we're going to have more and more of a challenge managing these water bodies for all the things that these water bodies do for us. So that is one of the many reasons why it's so important that we work together to do all that we can in our powers to manage these watersheds in a way that is the most healthy for the communities and for the fish and for everybody. So it's a complicated task, and I want to introduce our friend and colleague Dov Windeman, and he is a watershed coordinator working at Sierra Institute. But Sierra Institute had to hustle to get funding to hire Dov, and that's part of the theme of the series too. Is what are local organizations doing to innovate and to bring in funds and to bring in talent to facilitate these processes. So Dov is here. He's funded through the Department of Conservation, which is a state agency. And I'm going to pass it on to Dov. But anyway, we're really grateful to have folks like Dov in our region that are helping to catalyze these important things that are happening, that are really helping us get a better handle on conditions of these water bodies, and giving volunteers and other folks a way to get engaged. So thank you. I'm turning it over to Dov, and I'm here along the way. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks, Nils. And I'll just speak for a couple minutes, but like he introduced me, I'm the Sierra Institute Watershed Coordinator up here in Taylorsville, and funding for my position comes from the Department of Conservation. And I think it's a very interesting program because essentially it was a program that existed in the early 2000s, and after a research project from the Sierra Institute indicated that soft skills professionals on the ground can help connect different collaborative groups and kind of push groups towards decision making and work on the ground in a different way. They were essentially a good bang for their buck. And so the Department of Conservation reinvigorated that program and provided funding for handfuls of watershed coordinators to be placed really within the Sierra and other parts of California. Because we're so focused on convening groups and communication and outreach with communities, positions like mine play an interesting complementary role to professionals like the speakers that we'll be listening to today, who are very much working on the ground with natural resources and technically specialized in areas of wildlife and water resources. So those sort of technical and soft skills complement each other and are both necessary for the types of projects that we're trying to do to keep our communities and natural resources healthy. So I think enough of that, and we'll move on towards our presenters. I'm going to do my best to introduce people, but please, presenters, feel free to fill in the gaps. So this first presenter, feel pretty comfortable introducing. Noah Abramson works here with me at Sierra Institute. He's a trained geologist, but definitely a guru of water resources and mapping analysis. He's done a lot of great work for the South Lassen Watersheds group, a collaborative that we work closely with. And he's going to be talking to us a little bit about an assessment he did in collaboration with some of our partners. So Noah, feel free to start winding up, and I'm going to try to get this PowerPoint set up here and share it from my screen.
Got it. Thanks, Dov. Yeah, I'll just wait for you to pull up the PowerPoint and I'll get going. Okay, hello everyone. So like Dov said, I'm a hydrology specialist with Sierra Institute, and today I'll be sharing a bit of work that I did with Ken Roby in the South Lassen Watersheds group on assessing overall watershed conditions in the South Lassen area, but also this includes the Almanor catchment and the Almanor basin itself. So I'll just be highlighting our results and our findings and what our next steps are in light of this information. So next slide, please. So a bit about what we did and why we did it. The South Lassen Watershed Group really wanted to get a better sense of what the conditions are with respect to water resources in its planning area, which includes the South Fork Battle, Upper Mill, Upper Deer, North Fork Feather, and Upper Butte Creek watersheds. And so this is around an 850,000 acre landscape. And because of the size of this area, it's really not possible to have physical or quantitative data to assess the health of watersheds. So in the absence of things like stream flow, stream temperature, or water quality data, we have to rely on kind of ubiquitous characteristics that we can assess for each watershed that may be related to watershed health. So we built upon the work that Vince Rogers did in his Upper Feather River Basin assessment, and used a series of watershed health indicators that have a demonstrated relationship to affecting water quality, water quantity, and aquatic ecology. And so what we were looking at were things like near stream road density of road and stream crossings, wildfire history, and the condition of meadows within these 35 watersheds that we analyzed. Now, these results will be taken and used to allow land managers to really prioritize project areas, but also priorities in order to improve water resources in our planning area. So, and I'll get more into what I mean by that. So next slide. So the results of our analysis are largely presented in this map. We rated 35 watersheds as either being in poor, fair, or good condition, which are color-coded on this map here. And if we focus on the Almanor catchment, which extends from essentially this band of green-colored watersheds in the upper central portion of the map all the way to Lake Almanor, what we can see here is that the upper catchment watersheds are in relatively good condition. However, all the watersheds adjacent to Lake Almanor were found to be in poor condition. And really what this is picking up on is the urbanization around the lake, as well as the presence of the Chips Fire, which was a large disturbance event that really can affect water quality and water resources in the area. And so next slide. Really what we plan to do with this information is to take this with the South Lassen Watersheds Group and its partners to develop a coordinated improvement strategy. And really the kind of question we're facing now is, do we focus our time, effort, and resources on those watersheds that are in the best condition with the thought that relatively low cost investments can restore or improve these areas? But the drawback to that is these are largely found in unpopulated areas that are far away from major recreational areas or towns. And their benefits to water resources will largely be coming from a kind of a downstream secondary effect. Contrary to that, we could focus our resources and energy on those that are in the worst condition However, we may not have enough funding and resources to address all the issues that are in these areas. But in these areas, you kind of have a more direct and visible effect on water resources if you are to take that approach. So at this point, we're really trying to flush out what the priorities will be. But beyond that, one thing that I think is important to highlight in our area is that both forest and watershed health are really interrelated. And one thing that Sierra Institute has been working on with partners at the Alaska National Forest and Collins Pine Company is integrating fuels reduction work with stream restoration and other watershed improvement work like decommissioning roads or improving road stream crossings. And through this collaboration, we can really increase kind of the pace and scale of restoration that has multiple objectives from forest and watershed health. So that's sort of the next steps here and where we're going with this type of analysis. So with that, I'll end it, and thank you all for listening. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Noah. Very cool. Well, next we have Dr. Gina Johnson, who's going to be presenting to the group on her work on the Lake Almanor watershed and the lake with the Lake Almanor watershed group, looking at water quality in the lake. Hi, Gina.
Hi, good morning. So I'll be able to just present a small portion of what we've been doing at Lake Almanor. I've been associated with water quality since 2009. And for the first 5 years, 2009 to 2013, I and my husband, John McMurtry, were funded to do basic water quality research in the lake at 3 different stations, collecting temperature, oxygen, nutrient data, as well as plankton data. And then from 2014 to the present, I've been working with Scott McReynolds from Department of Water Resources, collecting even more data, including physical data on the tributaries, as well as stations in the lake itself. So what I want to present today is just a small look at some of that data and focus on what we've been able to show in terms of the effects of climate change on water quality. And as Nils was mentioning, as he's grown up, he's been able to document that these effects are occurring in the Lake Almanor area. So let's take a look at what some of these effects have been. Next slide, please. First of all, we've been able to measure, and others as well have measured, an increase in the water temperature, particularly the surface water temperature in Lake Almanor. And that's especially noticeable in the summer. So an increased surface water temperature in the lake. Secondly, a decrease in the snowpack, not necessarily a decrease in total precipitation, but less of the precipitation falling as snow and more falling as rain. And that, of course, contributes to an increase in water temperature, because the if more of the precipitation is falling as rain, it enters the lake more quickly, and it's entering at a higher temperature. So increased water temperature and a decrease in the snowpack in the watershed. Something that we've also measured has been a decrease in dissolved oxygen in the deeper waters of the lake. And this is going to be directly related to the fish populations that can be supported in the lake. And I'll look at that a little more deeply in just a few minutes. And then with an increase in temperature, we've also seen an increase in the populations of blue-green algae. Increase in populations algae in general, but we're most concerned about increase in the population of blue-green algae, which I'll look at a little bit more. So let's take a look at these first two trends. Next slide, please. Not only have we been able to show these, others have also looked at these. So the California EPA has documented that not only Lake Almanor, but other lakes in Northern California, Clear Lake, Lake Tahoe, and Mono Lake have been experiencing a warming trend in summer nighttime temperatures since 1992. I suspect it's been going on longer than that, but these are perhaps as far back as reliable records exist. So this is definitely related to a decrease in the amount of snow that's falling during the winter and spring that's causing an increase in water temperatures. Also documented by the Cal EPA has been that over the last century, runoff into the Sacramento River and its tributaries has declined by 9%, primarily due to a less accumulation of snow. And we've also seen less snow in the basin during the 11 years that we've been looking at Lake Almanor. So those first two trends that we've seen have been observed by other entities as well. Now I'd like to take a look at what the decrease in oxygen and increasing temperature has, what effect that has on the fisheries. So let's take a look at the next slide. This slide shows the ideal habitat for brown trout in Lake Almanor. This particular set of data comes from one station over by the dam in Lake Almanor. And what's plotted here is the depth of the lake on the vertical, and then across the horizontal is temperature and oxygen. And the line with the clear squares is oxygen. And so you'll see that it's mostly around 8 parts per million, but as you go deeper into the lake, it starts to taper off and drop down toward 0. The line with the black squares, filled in squares, is temperature. So up near the surface of the water, it's about 22 degrees. This is late June. So it's about 22 degrees, or just a little bit over 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, brown trout prefer, their ideal habitat is that the water temperature be less than 20 degrees and oxygen greater than 5 parts per million. So what I'm showing in blue is where in the lake do those conditions exist. So for brown trout, those conditions exist below 7 meters, from about 7 meters down to about 15 meters. There's a band of water that has those ideal conditions where the temperature is less than 20 and oxygen is greater than 5. If you go higher up in the water column, the water's too warm. If you go deeper than that, there's not enough oxygen. So the fish will be primarily confined to that band for their ideal conditions. They can find then those conditions during June, late June, that exist. And so we could say that the fish are not very stressed because they can find those conditions. However, if you look at the next graph, the next slide, by September, what happens in the lake is that the surface waters continue to warm and the wind mixes that warm water down to a greater depth. so that by September, about Labor Day, the surface waters are warmed so that the trout can no longer find water that's less than 20, except in a narrow band that exists from about 13 meters down to, 11 meters down to about 13 meters. Above 11 meters, the water's too warm. Below 11 meters, the oxygen drops off to 0 because decomposition is taking place down in the deeper waters of the lake and using up all of the oxygen. So brown trout and other species of trout become very stressed under these conditions and may not be able to find sufficient habitat in the lake that meets their requirements. Excuse me. So as you can see from this graph, their habitat gets so squeezed that they have very little space that meets all of their requirements. They can still use other parts of the lake, but they are not ideal. In certain years, especially drought years, where very little cold water comes into the lake at all, this habitat can completely disappear. So I've shown you one year in 2016 where it's just a narrow band. Other parts of the lake, it doesn't exist at all. So we're very concerned about the continued warming of the lake and its effect on cold water fish.
Hey, Gina, we have just about another minute or so before you have to wrap it up. And I do have a comment from a visitor who's curious if there's access to other graphs similar to this over time.
There are all of these graphs are available at Sierra Institute showing our temperature and oxygen values. Great. Yes. So the last effect that I wanted to talk about, next slide, is, Dove, next slide.
Hold on, I'm having a...
Oh, sorry. So the next slide just mentions the effects of blue-green algae, which populations really seem to like warm water, and they will outcompete other species of algae in the warmer waters. And the reason that we're concerned about blue-green algae is even though as individuals, they're very beautiful, and algae in general are. Next slide, please, Dove. They can, in large populations, lead to blooms where there are thousands of individuals per milliliter of water. This is one sample, and you've probably seen this even in Lake Almanor, where wind can concentrate the algae along the shore so that we can get very high populations. And these blooms, certain species can produce toxins, which can be very harmful to pets who might swim in the water and then lick these cells from their coats, or children who might swallow this water and ingest enough of the toxins so that they can get sick, or there have been many cases of pets dying as a result of exposure to these toxins. So we're very, very concerned about the increase in populations of blue-greens, which are definitely stimulated by the increase in water temperature and the runoff from these disturbed watersheds, which increase the nutrients coming into the lake. So Noah, I'm glad that you mentioned that much of the watershed adjoining the lake is in a poorer condition as a result of the urbanization. And I would really caution people about applying any sort of fertilizer to lawns, or be cautious about anything that might run into the lake that might stimulate algal growth. So unfortunately, DWR, Department of Water Resources, will no longer be able to help us with continuing our water quality investigations. If you're interested in looking at any of these studies, they are available on the Sierra Institute website, and I've included in my references those studies of climate change that I alluded to in my presentation. So be sure to look at the Sierra Institute website for more details on our water quality studies. Thank you.
That was great, Gina. Thank you so much for sharing that in a short amount of time. And if everybody wants to get to that link, there's a copy of it in your chat. So if you find your little chat icon, you can find one from Maria to that link. And there's lots and lots of important information in there. And we're going to move on now to Lake Almanor Fishing Association. Mr. John Crotty is on the line, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about what they're working on. Hi, John.
Thanks, Nils. Thanks for having us.
Anytime.
Hey, first off, and Maria, thank you for including Almanor Fishing Association. We appreciate it. I'm going to give a little background information on the Fishing Association. We were founded in 1985 by the Palouse and Chazes, who owned Lassen View at the time. We've been around for approximately 35 years. And we actually do a lot of public outreach programs, all of which were canceled this year, including our youth and veteran fishing events and our annual picnic. We will be back better, bigger and better in 2021. We've worked alongside with the California Fish and Wildlife and our Plumas County biologist, Amber Mauser, on a variety of projects, including our veteran fishing days and our youth fishing events. Last year, we assisted Amber in taking over 200 fourth graders fishing here in Plumas County. And we also assisted Craig Hemping with the youth fishing day down here at Canyon Dam last June, where we had over 100 kids participate. And in 2021, AFA, through the generous donations of Salesforce and some private donors, we're going to provide each youth participating in the fourth grade fishing events with the new fishing rod. Also, in 2017, the Almanor Fishing Association hosted our very first veterans fishing event. We had 13 boats, took 27 veterans fishing. Last year, our third year, we had 49 boats, took 97 veterans fishing. We had we had 3 veterans over the age of 90 attending that event. We hosted a barbecue for them afterwards with over 300 in attendance. And in that photo, you can see AFA. I'll talk about our fish pen program here in a little bit, but that's AFA volunteers installing fish into our fish pens from our transfer boat. Also, some of our other public outreach programs include working with Chester High School, Dallas Tognati, the Almanor Research Institute. We've been assisting them for the past 2 years, raising fish through their program at Chester High School. Last year, we were able to take 20,000 browns from Chester High School and place them into Lake Almanor. We put 13,500 browns into our fish pens at Hamilton Branch and released another 7,000 out through Almanor West over at the public boat ramp over there. We also work with Fuller at Feather River College in his fish hatchery program. We had a big work party there a couple of years ago, helped him clean up his facilities. We purchased food for him and for Chester High School as well. Here we are transferring fish. That video shows us transferring fish, the browns from Chester High School ARI into our transfer cage, and that boat in the background that you see will hook up to that cage and take the fish over to our pens at Ham Branch. A couple other things that AFA does here in the community. We maintain the public parking area at the Doug D'Angelo Overlook, the day use area at Ham Branch. We work with the U.S. Forest Service to maintain the grounds at the Canyon Dam Boat Ranch and ramp in the winter. And we have numerous work parties throughout the year to maintain and repair our pens. Our pen program is really the backbone of AFA. It's been in existence since 1985. Each year we raise 50,000 rainbows in these pens. We get them in late October. We feed them daily through the winter. Last year we spent about $12,000 on fish. Here's our fish pens in the middle of the winter. These, as you can see, we get a group of volunteers down there. Anytime we have a snow event, we have to clean the top of the pen so we're able to feed the fish. This is, anybody who lives up here in Plumas County knows what the winters are like. And anytime there's a snow event, we'll have anywhere from 6 to 10 people down removing snow. Our pen program, we have, you can see the void on the left-hand side of your screen. We actually put 2 new fish pens in last year. We purchased, there's 10 pens right there. We've added 2 more, so we have 12 pens available. We're hoping to put 60,000 fish in our fish pens this year. And the fish come from California Fish and Wildlife from the Dara Springs Hatchery down in Manton. We get 50,000 fertile rainbows every year, and they get raised throughout the winter where they more than triple in size before we release them in late April when the water temp gets up into approaches the 60-degree mark and makes it actually the water warms up so much that we have to let them go. Almanor is and has been a world-class fishery, largely in part to these volunteers here in this picture. We are a dedicated group. We missed 2 days of feeding last year in those pens for the entire winter. And you can see the staircase in the background. There's a little pontoon boat that we use to transfer across. This is an exceptionally nice day for working on the docks. It's a little cold, as you can see, but calm and flat conditions. There's actually four species of fish that people target here on Lake Almanor. There's smallmouth bass, there's brown trout, there's rainbow trout, and there's king salmon. Fish and Wildlife put 150,000, planted 150,000 king salmon this year. They planted 150,000 king salmon last year, all fingerling size. We actually went 2 years because of some conditions at the hatchery. We were unable to get fish for 2 years, so we're just starting the salmon cycle here on Almanor. So the fish that we're catching now are more of the 10 to 12 inch variety, and the fish that were planted this year, next year will be 10 or 12. And so the fish that were planted 2 years ago will be the 16 to 18 next year. So we're hoping to get back into an annual planting cycle of salmon, and along with the rainbows, 60,000 that we put in, or 50,000 we put in every year, and additional plants from Fish and Wildlife, and the 40 to 60,000 browns that get planted annually on Lake Almanor, we have a sustainable fishery here. One of the things that the bait fish, the predominant bait fish here on Almanor is the pond smelt, but Lake Almanor, the aquatic life is off the charts. We have bug hatches, the hexagena, the mayfly being one of them that takes place in June, anywhere from the second week of June through the second or third week of July. Between the bugs and the insects and the pond smelt, these fish grow exceptionally large in short periods of time, and it's a fishery where you can go out and catch a 5-pound brown, a 5-pound rainbow, or a 5-pound smallmouth, or a 5-pound salmon at any given time. So the fishery is alive and healthy, thanks in large part to our partners, California Fish and Wildlife, Pacific Gas and Electric, and our dedicated volunteers. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, John, that's impressive. It's impressive what you guys have been able to accomplish over all these years. And I had a question from a attendee. He was asking about largemouth bass and Sacramento perch, if those are some of the species also that are on your radar.
There are some largemouth bass out on the lake, not very many. They seem to hang out up by the causeway, by the super ditch, up in that area. And this year there's been a lot of Sacramento perch caught. I've actually caught more Sacramento perch in one day than I've caught in the previous 6 years combined. So I'm not sure what's happening there, if the warm water has any impact on that, but the Sacramento perch are alive and well. And we actually caught a few over 3 pounds, so that's a huge perch.
Yeah,
and I know
I wanted to give a shout out. Go ahead.
No, I just said they're a great bait fish too as well.
Yeah, so I wanted to give a shout out to Almanor Fishing Association. I do work with the Mountain Meadows Conservancy out of Westwood, and in 2015, the Mountain Meadows Reservoir went dry, and we've been slowly working to rebuild the bass population there. And Almanor Fishing Association gave a very generous donation to help purchase more bass. So I just wanted to give a shout out to you guys for not only looking at Almanor, but you're looking at this whole kind of basin. So it's just, I think your organization is really an embodiment of like the power of passion, right? And volunteerism, and how we can really accomplish a lot without a huge amount of funds, just by having a good mission and working hard and recruiting volunteers. So that's exciting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So one thing that we've attempted to do over the last few years is increase our public outreach programs, whether it's a veterans fishing event, youth fishing event, working with the high school, working with Feather River College, attending chamber events, just getting the word out that, AFA is doing everything that we can collectively to enhance our fishery.
Great story. Thank you so much for being here. Hey, so we're going to open it up to questions and answers now. We've had a few come in on the chat, but does anybody does anybody have any questions so far about any of these topics that have been covered?
Some questions here from members attending. The first is, Gina, how can people in the community support and engage with the water quality monitoring efforts?
Well, one way is, of course, to become an advocate through the Sierra Institute Advocate Program. You can also become a member of LOG, Lake Almanor Watershed Group, or contribute to LOG's efforts. We're also trying to get possibly a volunteer program going that would involve participating in making some of the measurements. That will require some training and also the purchase of some of the equipment necessary to do those measurements, now that Department of Water Resources won't be around to help us out. So money as well as time are going to be very useful to our efforts. And we do need to continue some sort of water quality monitoring to know what's happening in our lake.
Thank you, Gina. That's so important. If you're interested in volunteering or making a gift, you can go to the Lake Almanor page that the link that I shared earlier. Or we will also be sharing later a page dedicated to the State of the Lake presentation, where some of the graphs, the pictures, the resources that our wonderful speakers have shared will be available. Noah, we've got a question for you. How much do the upper watersheds influence or affect lower watersheds?
That's a really good question. They're really important from the standpoint, especially when you consider the effects of climate change that we're going to be seeing. Those upper watersheds are going to become much more critical in coming years, as they can be perennial sources of cool water to the lake, and they can help also increase the amount of water that's available downstream year round. So they are critical, and they'll become more critical to the lake in coming years in light of climate change, which is another aspect that I didn't really touch on that is important in considering on where we focus our efforts on increasing the function of our watersheds. So, yeah.
Great. We have a question from Kelly Bainbridge. I think this is for you, Gina. She's curious to know if the students at Chester High School or Chester Elementary School 6th grade would be able to help with the monitoring or water quality work.
Well, for sure, the high school students could. I'm not sure about the 6th graders. It's quite possible we could come up with some tasks that the 6th graders could do. But certainly the high school students, and I think that they have been involved in the past. I would just have to do some thinking on that one, but
sounds great.
For sure.
Yeah, citizen science is so important to all that we do.
It is. And also people that are in the basin year round,
right,
make a big difference because measurements need to be made year round to get a more complete picture.
And we need to thank, from the Lake Almanor Watershed Group, we need to make a really heartfelt thank to Phil Datner, who is a member of the Almanor Fishing Association, and he has helped us terrifically this year with doing our those testing. So I have another question from Amy. How big of a difference does it make with the optimum dissolved oxygen levels between browns and rainbows to kings?
Wow, it may be that John knows more than I do, but their oxygen requirements are not that different. So the difference might not be more than a part per million or so. Okay. All of the trout are very sensitive to oxygen and temperature.
Gotcha.
So browns are just a little bit more than rainbows, but all of them are considered cold water fish. So it's not until you get toward the bass that you get more tolerant fish in terms of temperature and oxygen.
Gotcha.
So
and
they're all really sensitive.
From a conservation perspective, with the brown trouts not being natural or native, are there any protections for these species? That question can go to any of the panelists.
There's, I can answer that one. Lake Almanor is approved for fertile browns. The California Fish and Wildlife does not raise fertile browns. So, and all of the rainbows that we get are fertile fish. So, yes, we can. There's no special restrictions on the harvesting of browns. There's we are working with, when we work with both Feather River College and ARI, those are fertile fish that we're getting. The eggs have not been triploided, sterilized. So, and that's what we would ultimately shoot for. It's just Fish and Wildlife does not raise fertile browns.
Gotcha.
And back to the oxygen question real quick. Sure. I know that summer months, the salmon do have a tendency to go seek the cooler, deeper water. We typically don't see them on the surface during the summertime, as we do some of the other fish.
Yeah, and I might just add to that during the summer, more and more, as we get to September, more and more of the fish tend to seek out Hamilton Branch because the waters of Hamilton Branch have been cooled by the springs that enter Hamilton Branch. And so in really stressful years, you'll find the fish aggregating where Hamilton Branch comes into the lake, because that water is oxygenated and much cooler, as much as 10 or 12 degrees cooler than the surface water of the lake. Would you agree, John?
No, I would agree with that assessment. And there are a number of large springs located throughout the lake, and that's where we're finding fish right now. Big Springs being one of them. And at one time, Big Springs, before they dammed Almanor, was one of the largest natural springs in the state of California. And there's some large springs off of Bailey Creek as well. And those fish do congregate in that cooler, oxygenated water.
Yeah.
We have another question from Bill Reed. Does industry such as ranching, farming, or golf course runoff contribute to the algae blooms in the lake?
Oh, absolutely. Ranching can be a big contributor. Obviously, if cattle are confined to a small area, the waste from cattle, especially if there's a stream that goes through, that waste can be carried into the lake. And we've had that happening up above Mountain Meadows Reservoir before. I don't know if that still occurs, but ranching can definitely be a problem. Also, cattle can be very destructive to the vegetation if they're not spread out. So if you have too many cattle in too small a space, they can really destroy the vegetation, which then increases the runoff and brings soil as well as nutrients into the lake.
And how about the golf course or other fertilized lawn areas?
Well, we have not, we don't have a program set up to actually measure, but obviously the golf course is green because it is fertilized. I don't know how much runoff occurs from the golf course or from the golf courses, but I suspect that there is some runoff that occurs. It may not be on the surface, but it could be subsurface runoff that makes its way into the lake and thus would bring fertilizers in the form of nitrogen and or phosphorus.
Great. We have another question from Chip. Has anyone done a study on the health of the springs?
I wouldn't know. I haven't heard.
Okay. And from Linda Bailey, thinking that the climate is warming more each year, how much more warming can the fish and the health of the lake sustain? I understand that's a big question.
I think any of us could tackle that one. Well, we have that going on the warming of the lake. That's occurring. We also have natural variation in California's weather. So drought, we're a drought-prone state. So while we have gradual warming, we also have variation from year to year on the amount of precipitation. So for example, during the 10 years or 11 years I've been studying the lake, we had a series of drought years from 2014 to 2016 when the lake was in very bad shape. But 2017 and 19 were wet years, so the lake got better. 2020 is a pretty dry year. So we've got several things going on, more than just gradual warming due to climate change. We also have just the variability that's occurring that affects water quality. So it's really hard to say how much more we can take as far as the lake's overall ecosystem. But certainly we can improve what's happening to the lake by decreasing the amount of runoff that contains nutrients. We can try to decrease water pollution of different kinds, improve our land use practices around the lake, and thus improve water quality in other ways.
Noah, do you have anything to add on this question?
Yeah, I'll add to Gina there that high severity or large wildfire can be a really big problem from increasing runoff into the lake. By removing a lot of vegetative cover, you increase the amount of water falling on the ground at a rapid pace, and you can really contribute much more water after a large fire than the landscape's really normalized to. So it's in the interest of you know, the health of the lake to really reduce these large scale wildfires as well. Just thought I'd add that point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point.
I want to add something to that, and then there's a question we haven't addressed yet. And just last Tuesday, we had a heavy downpour thunderstorm up there in Genesee Valley, and it's kind of on the Antelope Grade. A huge amount of sediment entered Indian Creek, like large volumes, and the creek's starting to clear out now, but it was heavily impacted. So that's an example of, you know, if we have a huge wildfire, or especially around any water body or any water course, and then there's, you know, we are going to get thunderstorms periodically. That's how it goes. And then in the winter, we'll get bigger events. It'll just mobilize those materials quicker. And that's been happening for millennia, but we have delicate balances in place right now. And so major events like that can really impact insects and fish for a long time. So that's just a contemporary example because it happened last Tuesday. I was up there last Wednesday. I saw the stream, and it's been flowing very dark brown all week. Tom Tish had a question, and he was curious if Gina could talk a little bit about how PG&E's management of the reservoir affects water quality, and how, if that's something that should be analyzed a little bit more in terms of like when they draw down the lake and how that affects water temp and everything.
Well,
is that enough, Tom? Did I cover it, Tom? I know it's a slippery slope, but I'm just relaying the question.
I'm afraid that is a slippery slope. I mean, what would be ideal is if they didn't draw down the lake at all, but that's not going to happen. What would be ideal is if the lake were left to be more natural and we could keep the water levels up. But unfortunately, they draw down the lake at a time where the water's already pretty warm, and we're talking about toward the end of summer, at least what's been happening lately. And PG&E really hasn't done very much in terms of management of the lake lately. What would be ideal is if they were to step in and take over some sort of a water quality program in which they did the water quality measurements and made those available to the public. But I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon. The main problem that I see is that there really is not an abundance of cold water in the lake to be shared with downstream requirements. So that's what I've been trying to show in my own arguments to the State Water Board, is that there is not an abundance of cold water available in Lake Almanor, and that PG&E needs to be moving toward some sort of an oxygenation program for Lake Almanor that would increase the availability of oxygen in the deeper waters of the lake during the summer. And that would increase the habitat for cold water fish in Lake Almanor.
Thank you, Gina. That was terrific. I want to thank all of our speakers. We're getting close to the end here, so I'm going to do a little wrap up. And one of the things I'd like to mention is, how can you contribute? I think one of the first ways you can think about contributing is volunteering. whether it's to the Sierra Institute, the Feather River Land Trust, the Lake Almanor Watershed Group, the Almanor Fishing Association. All of those groups have programs that welcome volunteers. On the subject of volunteers, I'm going to just share a quick update, and that is that the Lake Almanor Watershed Group is losing our wonderful champion. That's Aaron Sendell. He's retiring. And so to honor his many, many years of commitment, we've created the Watershed Hero Tribute Fund. So if you would like to honor Aaron for serving for 22 years, both not just with the Lake Almanor Watershed Group, but its predecessor, ABWAC, and even before that, I mean, his service goes back to 1998, if not before. You can contribute to this fund. I'll put the link for it on the State of the Lake website. But consider becoming a volunteer like Aaron. He's really been a tremendous help, and we're so delighted to have had his help, but we really need to think about carrying that work forward. So consider volunteering for any of these groups, especially the Lake Almanor Watershed Group. Since we're losing Aaron, we really need another hero to step up. You can also become a member, an advocate, and support the Lake Almanor Watershed Group financially. You might wonder why financial commitments are important when Sierra Institute and Feather River Land Trust and other organizations we're hustling, just like Neil said, we're going out there and we're getting grants. Well, the reason that your investment matters is because when we apply for a grant, whether it's with the state or with philanthropists, what they care about isn't just how good our proposal is, it's how much the local community cares about our work, cares about the region. So whether you volunteer or become a member or make a financial contribution, every little bit that you contribute becomes part of the story that we can tell to those philanthropists to get them to invest in our community. So your $50 can be leveraged to become a $100,000 or $1 million grant down the line. So it's really important that you participate and show your pride in your community and your commitment.